All right, welcome everybody to the Air War podcast presented by Pursuit Picks Media. It's just me, Mitchell, flying solo today. Sam is not aware that I'm doing this episode, and I wasn't even aware that I was doing this episode until a decision that I made, probably earlier this afternoon. I've been working on some scripts for this little project that I'm doing, which you can see here by the thumbnail, and that's the 78th Fighter Group project. Back at the end of May, I was working on a video that's out now. You can go check it out on the Pursuit Picks Media YouTube page about the 78th Fighter Group's appearance in Episode 9 of Masters of the Air. And that was just a short 6 or 7 minute video that highlighted what they would have been doing on February 3rd, 1945, and just put into context what their objectives were in relation to where you were seeing them in Episode 9. And that was a lot of fun for me to do. And, I've had a relationship with the 78th Fighter Group going back to 2011 when I was playing IL-2, Sturmovik 1946. I'm still a big flight simmer, and I still represent the 78th Fighter Group while I play IL-2 Great Battles. That's my current sim. So if you play Great Battles, be sure to drop us an email or a direct message on Instagram, and I'll throw you my call sign info. But anyways, going back to 2011, I kind of had this virtual representation of the 78th Fighter Group, and we would fly P-51s and P-47s online and in a 100-person server, and it was a lot of fun. And at the time, there were still quite a few World War II fighter pilots that were alive and were actually easy to contact. And there was about 8 in total during my own little private search when I was in high school. I was trying to basically collect World War II fighter pilot interviews. And of all of the gentlemen who I interviewed, there was only one who stayed in very consistent contact with me, and that was Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hewitt, who flew with the 78th Fighter Group. And it was a really unique and just like out of the blue opportunity. I remember surfing a World War II aviation forum, and he had an account and would talk to people. He'd post on there, and you could tell he was sharp as a tack and had pretty good grammar and knew his way around a keyboard for being, he would have been 91 at that time. And so just for the hell of it, I was like, all right, I'm gonna this is, of all the guys I want to talk to, this is the one, right? Because he flew with the 78th. I didn't know much about him other than his P-51 was named Big Dick, which, come to find out, had to do with a score in craps, a roll in craps, I believe. So that's kind of where that name came from. Not exactly what I expected it, but pretty funny. Let me pull up Colonel Hewitt for the viewing audience. So there you go. There's Colonel Hewitt in his P-51 Big Dick. That's at 25,000 feet over France on March 17th, 1945. That's a scan of a photo that he sent me. And then I've got that photo hanging out in my living room. But anyways, so I emailed Colonel Dick at P47Dick at AOL.com. And this was right before I went to EAA Air Venture 2011 in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, basically the biggest air show in America. Met up with a bunch of flight sim buddies from the virtual 78th, and I get home a week and a half later, and at the top of my inbox is a reply from P47Dick at AOL.com, and it was amazing, and it was the spawn of a year and a half long, 2 year long pen pal relationship that I had with Colonel Hewitt, and it was really, really special. It was just, and even now it still tugs on heartstrings to think about it. And And basically, I would say up until about 6 months or so before he passed away 10 years ago, so July 2014. Just before then was our last email exchange, but right up until he passed away, him and I stayed in contact, and he answered every one of my emails. And yeah, it's just so crazy to think back on it now, and how many World War II veterans we had back then. And fast forward 14, 15 years, and almost all of them are gone now. So it's just it's so hard, but that's why we're doing this. That's why I'm doing this project, because it's part of my contribution to the memory of that generation and what they did for us. And I have so much interest in the 78th Fighter Group, and so much material and knowledge that I think it would be wrong of me to not share it with people. So that's why we're here. Anyways, so Lieutenant Colonel Hewitt wrote a book called Target of Opportunity, Tales and Contrails of the Second World War. I would highly recommend picking that up if you're into fighter pilot memoirs. He wrote his about 45 years after the end of the event, the end of World War II, but he kept a detailed diary, I believe, and very detailed flight records and after action reports, that there's really no doubt to me that pretty much everything he says in that memoir is what happened. I don't find any real exaggeration in it. I mean, I've got a bookshelf of memoirs behind me, and you can kind of tell where things are spiced up a little bit because they were written, decades after the war. But memory is a funny thing, right? So anyways, I would highly recommend picking that up. It's Target of Opportunity, Tales and Contrails of the Second World War. I've got mine in a glass case, so unfortunately, I can't show you that copy, but I do have it. I still have my copy that he sent me with that photo, and then that picture of the P-47 hanging on the wall behind me that he sent back in. I was back in November of 2011. It was right around Veterans Day when he sent me that, and he was really excited because I had emailed him some screenshots of us flying his P-51 Big Dick, and then a couple other planes from his squadron, which was the 82nd Fighter Squadron, and he absolutely loved that. So it was just a really cool. I remember that email like vividly, right? And yeah, it's just, sorry, getting a little sentimental here, but anyways, so Colonel Hewitt arrived at RAF Duxford, the base that the 78th flew out of for its 2 years of combat operations from April 43 to April 45. He arrived as a replacement pilot in September 43. And during his time overseas, he flies 2 combat tours plus 2 50-hour extensions when the 78th converts from the P-47 to the P-51 in December 1944. And he did those 2 combat extensions because he could see that the end of the war was in sight. He was a captain at this point, often serving as a flight leader, and then eventually becoming squadron leader of the 82nd in, I believe, March 1945. And he felt that, if he was there, maybe it would help expedite the Germans' capitulation. And just an absolutely remarkable man. So he ended up flying 144 combat missions and shot down 4 aircraft in air-to-air combat. Although unofficially, he shot down 6. He had 2 Me-262s on April 17th, 1945 that he both shot down while they were in a landing pattern. But unfortunately, those were unconfirmed. His gun camera film didn't develop, and then also his wingman, Al Rosenbaum, was shot down. And from his eyewitness report, he figured that Rosenbaum's Mustang hit the ground at over 300 miles an hour, hit by AAA fire, impacts the ground, and cartwheels, and he assumed that Rosenbaum died. And turns out that he did not. He was captured, and Hewitt didn't find this out until after the war, and he tried for a number of years to get in contact with Rosenbaum. And unfortunately, by the time he was able to find out where he was, Rosenbaum was going through health issues, suffered a heart attack, and then later died in a VA hospital in the 60s. So he was never able to get confirmation of those two kills. But as he said in his book, so be it. So basically, the heart and soul of this project rests with this man right here, and that is Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hewitt. I think without Colonel Hewitt, I probably wouldn't have this passion and desire to carry on with this project. And it'll be really exciting to have episodes of the Air War podcast dedicated to the 78th, as well as this video series that I've started to develop, because it's a group that's overlooked, like so many, from so many different nations within, under the umbrella of the air war, throughout the entirety of the Second World War. So if we break it down into relative terms, the 78th is with the 8th Air Force, and they're among the first three groups to arrive in England under the 8th Fighter Command. So it's the 4th, the 56th, and the 78th. Those were the first three American fighter groups of the 8th Air Force to arrive in England. The 78th is unique in the sense that it was the first almost operational P-38 group in England, and it did arrive in England with P-38s in late 1942. Now, Operation Torch goes on in September 1942. 78th gets to England shortly after that time, and there's a priority on capturing, there's a priority on liberating North Africa so you can expand your operations in the Mediterranean theater and get through what Churchill called the soft underbelly of Europe, which is Sicily, Italy, work your way up through there, southern France, that particular part of Europe. And P-38 losses of the 12th Air Force were high, and there were three groups within the 12th that between each group had 30, there were 30 planes per group. So there were about 90 P-38s operating in North Africa at the time that the 78th gets to England. So there was basically this urgency of getting as many P-38s to North Africa as possible. And because of this, the 78th loses a lot of its P-38s and several pilots to the 12th Air Force. They're ultimately transferred out of the 8th to the 12th to replenish those losses. So they get to England in the P-38, and what's crazy is Colonel Armin Peterson, who was group leader of the 78th at the time, said 2 days from now we're expected to go, or excuse me, he says on one day in January 1943 that we're going to go operational in 1 month. February 43, we are expected to be flying escort missions for the 8th Bomber Command. 2 days later, they get the order to transfer those P-38s out of the 78th and over to the 12th Air Force. Pretty wild stuff. So that was one of the early setbacks for the 78th, and what makes them unique is that they were the only 8th Air Force fighter group to use the P-38, the P-47, and then the P-51. So I think one of the reasons you don't really hear about the 78th as much as units like Zemke's Wolfpack 56 fighter group. They were a Thunderbolt only unit for their entire combat saga during World War II. Zemke's Wolfpack had aces like Gabby Gabreski, Robert S. Johnson, Bud Mahurin, Gerald Johnson, Fred Christensen, sorry. Just all those heavy hitter triple and quadruple aces. And the 56 ended up scoring 664 kills. They were the highest scoring 8th Air Force group in terms of air kills, and I think in terms of overall claims too, if you throw in ground kills as well, which was specific to the 8th Air Force. The 8th Air Force did record ground kills, even though those were thrown out in terms of like what qualified you as an ace after World War II. So if we just go down the list, right? So the highest scoring group in the 8th is the 56. They had 664 air kills. Next is the 357th. This is a Mustang only group for their entire saga of combat during World War II. The 357th is the Oxford Boys. So this is Bud Anderson and Chuck Yeager, Richard Weaver, Richard Peterson, Obie O'Brien, just a lot of famous aces, and in fact, I think that group had more fighter aces within one unit than anybody else, and they ended up scoring 595 air kills. Next down is Blakesley's Bachelors. This is the 4th fighter group. They had 550 kills. So Don Blakesley, one of the superb American air combat leaders of World War II. He flew Spitfires and then P-47s and then P-51s. He was part of the Eagle Squadron. That was the American pilots who flew Spitfires for the Brits and then were transferred back into the United States Army Air Forces once America entered the war. 4th fighter group had guys like Don Gentili, John Godfrey. There were a lot of Ralph Hoffer is another name that pops up. Just a lot of aces, a very aggressive unit. Suffered a lot of losses, but also did a lot of damage in the air. They ended up having 550 air kills for 3rd place. Next is the 352nd Fighter Group. This is the Blue-Nosed Bastards of Bodney. I think that name pretty much sums it all, but they had George Preddy and John C. Meyer. Sandy Motes, who's still alive. He's 101 years old. He's one of three or four living American aces. Ed Heller, William Wisner, so many guys in the 352nd. Again, legends within the air war in Europe. And then, then we've got the 355th Fighter Group. They had 341 kills. A lot of aces in that unit. Very underappreciated unit. I really like the 355th Fighter Group. Then we've got the 353rd with 328 kills for 6th place. This is the Slyberg group. So they had the yellow and black checker nose. Similar pattern to the 78th, but yellow and black. The 78th had black and white. And then in 7th place, we come to the 78th Fighter Group with 326 air kills. So they're middle of the road in terms of air victory claims under the 8th Fighter Command. So they're 7th out of 15th if we rank it in terms of air kills within the 8th Fighter Command. So they're again middle of the road. They never really had any big aces that you would have seen in the headlines, and it's unfortunate because they were among the original 3 groups that made it over to England and fought the air war for 2 years over Europe against the Luftwaffe. So it's too bad that they get overshadowed. What helps them in today's memory is their air base. RAF Duxford is host to several museums. You've got the American Air Museum, the Fighter Collection, the Old Flying Machine Company. There's the Airborne Assault Museum, the Land Warfare Museum, and Duxford is home to several air shows and flying days throughout the flying season that they have there. So it's an incredible place, and at some point within the next few years, I will be going there, and you can bet your bottom dollar that that will be an on-site podcast episode when I get there. So if you're curious about where I got those stats, I'll leave them in the description on our YouTube video version of this podcast. Those came from World War II aircraft performance, and those were compiled by Bill Marshall, whose dad was a P-51 pilot in the 355th Fighter Group. Bill does a lot of great research that is available on World War II aircraftperformance.org. So, a couple things about the 78th. Again, their black and white checker nose pattern is very distinctive, and you started to see this pattern starting in April 1944, and then they carried it on all of their P-47s and P-51s through the end of the war. If you've ever seen the P-51 Big Beautiful Doll, then you're probably familiar with that pattern. So I'm going to throw up some footage here while I keep rambling. You'll have to excuse my rambling. This tends to happen from time to time. Anyways, there's some... this is color gun camera footage shot by Mustang pilots of the 78th Fighter Group. This is all in March and April of 1945, so enjoy that. If you want to see the video on itself and on its own and stop listening to me, just jump over to the Pursuit Pics Media YouTube channel. So the 78th flew out of Duxford. Combat operations are from April 1943 to 1945. There's some discrepancy on how many missions they flew. My research, I just am going to say that it's over 450 combat missions. And then alongside the 4th and the 56th, they were among the first 8th Air Force fighter groups to arrive in England. They were during their time in World War II, they'll receive 2 distinguished unit citations. The first for flying 20 low-level missions in support of Operation Market Garden, where they escorted troop-carrying aircraft such as C-47s, towing gliders. And their mission there was protecting those troop carrier aircraft from Luftwaffe fighters while also attacking German anti-aircraft positions. And they suffered heavy losses during these. It was about a week and a half long time where they were flying support for Operation Market Garden, and they lose 21 P-47s in the month of September. As in terms of losses, I believe it was the worst month for casualties for the 78th. So they were a pioneer group of many firsts. They were the first group to use external fuel tanks in the European theater of operations during combat. This doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but at the time, where one thing the 8th Fighter Command was trying to do was extend the range of P-47s so they could go further with the bombers and hit factories deeper into Germany, these deep penetration missions that you hear about. That was a big deal, and so they were the first ones to experiment with those on combat operations. And so because of that, they were able to perform the first penetration mission of Germany. So instead of just hitting targets in places like Rouen, France, or Rotterdam in the Netherlands, they were able to go into places like, the Ruhr Valley or Bremen or, Wilhelmshaven, areas like that. They had the first 8th Air Force fighter ace, and that was Captain Charles London. That was flying a P-47C Thunderbolt before they even had the D model in numbers. The first 8th Air Force pilot to score a triple kill, and that was Eugene Roberts. He shot down 2 FW-190s and 1 BF-109 on July 30th, 1943 over Holland. And that's kind of one thing that you see in 1943 is there's a lot of operations over France, the Netherlands, and Belgium. You don't really see too many over Germany. They do get to Germany eventually, but when you do a lot of this research, it's interesting to see the difference in terms of geography for these after action and encounter reports from guys who were flying Razorback P-47s in the summer of 1943 than guys flying P-51s in the spring of 1945, where you see this footage, like this P-51 is strafing Me-262s, and this is on an airfield in Czechoslovakia. It's pretty incredible how far the 8th Fighter Command was able to get in terms of extending range with its fighters in the course of just a few years. And it's a technology race. I think sometimes we kind of get lost in that idea that, these fighter planes are at the time state of the art, but if you don't have the legs to go the distance to Germany, then you can only be so effective at times. So they were also the first 8th Air Force fighter group to score double-digit kills in a single mission. So I believe it was 10 or 11 kills. I'd have to go back and verify this. But anyways, they were the first group to score 10 or more kills as a unit on a single mission. This is an important one, and I made sure I highlighted this towards the end because this is going to be this will become a very important part of the air war for the 78th once we get to the spring of 1944 and on. And that is the 78th had the first strafing attack, which was carried out by Quince Brown, who ended up becoming the highest scoring 78th Fighter Group pilot. But Quince Brown did this in 1943, which was unheard of at the time. And he was pursued by 2 FW-190s, dove to the deck where the P-47 in a dive is going to excel. Nothing's going to catch a P-47 in a dive from decent altitude. And so he outruns the 2 190s. This is over the Netherlands, and he follows railroad tracks to a rail yard near at Leiden, I believe is how you say it. Leiden in the Netherlands, and he shoots up the train. Well, this was the first strafing attack carried out by the 8th Air Force. Now, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but when we get to January 1944, when Jimmy Doolittle takes over the 8th Air Force and he issues Pursue and Destroy, which is where the fighters within the 8th Fighter, so the fighter groups within the 8th Fighter Command are released from escort duty to go down on the deck and shoot up anything that supports the German war effort. And this becomes a normalcy, in just a few months after Brown's attack. So it doesn't seem like a big deal at the time, but that was the first time in Europe where an American pilot used his aircraft to shoot up something German on the ground. Pretty wild. And then lastly, the 78th was the 70th scored the first credited Me-262 kill. There's two unconfirmed ones. One was actually by another 78th Fighter Group pilot, where they kind of forced it, and then without firing a shot, the plane crash landed, and then they spun around and strafed it. But the first confirmed Me-262 kill, at least for the 8th Air Force, occurred on October 7th, 1944, over Osnabrück, Germany, where a 262 was shot down on landing by Major Richard Connor, and he was flying a P-47 Thunderbolt at the time. We often associate the P-51 with shooting down jets, but the P-47 got its fair share of jet kills as well. So those are just some, super basic stats about the 78th and notes about the 78th that I thought people would find interesting. And as you can see here, we've got some color footage of the 78th at RAF Duxford. This was shot on June 7th, 1945. It was the day after the 1-year commemoration events for D-Day. And the Signal Corps photographer shot this color footage. And one thing that's cool here is you can see in the footage that there's another photographer taking pictures of these planes. And So you can see, if you're watching the video version, you can see him taking photos right here of that line of Mustangs. So I just so happen to have that photo that he took right. Let's see. He was standing in front of the 83rd. Well, I'll pull up the photos that he took here. So this is one of them. So that's one of them right there. And then I believe the other one he took that you saw in that that panning shot of all of those Mustangs with the red rudders, which would indicate the 82nd Fighter Squadron, is this one right here. And you can see that line of Mustangs, but I'm pretty sure that that is the same photograph that gentleman was taking. So pretty cool stuff that I just happened to notice while looking at hours worth of pictures and videos of the 78th Fighter Group. But really cool stuff, and that's part of the fun about diving into the research of this unit. So let's throw up, while I keep rambling, let's throw up some more video for the viewing audience. So here we've got black and white footage of P-47 gun cam films shot by 78th pilots in the spring of 1944. So one thing that's interesting about the 78th is if you go through a lot of their headquarters reports, there's quite a few mentions, particularly in 1943 and 1945, where a number of personnel felt that the group was jinxed. And I think that's somewhat commonplace to have superstition within a World War II, whether it be a fighter group or a bomber group. You probably feel like when your losses keep mounting that there's just something that's not going your way. And there were a number of things that made these guys feel that way. And obviously one of them being that they lost their P-38s and several pilots of the 12th Air Force to replace those losses, and had to reluctantly transition into the P-47, which a lot of guys were not happy about doing that. And this happened again in December 1944, where they go from the P-47 to the P-51, and there you can read into that reluctance from guys of like who have been flying the P-47 for 50 or 60 missions. They're near the end of their tour, and then they go into the P-51, and it's a totally different aircraft and a somewhat less forgiving aircraft than the P-47. P-51's an excellent fighter, but some of those guys who were jug jockeys preferred the P-47 until they got more acclimated to the P-51's handling characteristics. On July 1st, 1943, the first group commander, Colonel Armin Peterson, was killed in an air battle over Holland, and Peterson was a highly respected and loved leader, so much so that his radio call sign King Post was retired immediately as soon as they found out that Colonel Pete, that's what the guys called him, Colonel Pete, was killed in action. So what's crazy is we go to not even 1 month later, and the next group commander, Lieutenant Colonel Melvin McNichol, becomes a POW on July 30th, 1943 over Holland. And this is an absolutely bug nut story. So he loses oxygen up at, he's well above 12,000, 13,000 feet, whatever altitude it is you need, where you need to start going over oxygen. But I think it's above 20,000 feet. So he loses oxygen, he passes out. He collides with another P-47 that was flown by Lieutenant James Byers. Byers bails out, but is killed at some point, whether the chute didn't deploy or he hit something on impact, not sure. But Byers is tragically killed. So the P-47s collide, and McNichol miraculously survives his P-47 crashing while he's unconscious. He has no idea that this even happened. And he wakes up strapped inside his P-47 upside down with he's got both shoulders are broken. And he's got Dutch underground members getting him out of his P-47. It's absolutely, I mean, you can't make this shit up. It's just crazy. So the Dutch resistance fighters get him out of his P-47. They radio, they're able to communicate with London. They ask for instructions, and he's so banged up that the Allies are like, look, just find a way to turn him over to the Germans without you getting caught. And because we feel that he's going to have a better chance getting medical treatment from the Germans, and that's what happens. He becomes a POW until VE Day. But yeah, just crazy to lose your a beloved group commander, one of the originals, on one of the first missions. This is 3 months into them flying their early missions. So he goes down on July 1st, 1943. That's Peterson, and then less than a month later, McNichol has this crazy incident where nobody knew if he survived and ends up becoming a prisoner of war, thankfully. So August 17th, 1943, this is the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid. A lot of people are familiar with this. This is where the 8th Air Force flies a dual strike mission to try and break the Luftwaffe up into 2 different groups. So that way you wouldn't, the idea being that you wouldn't lose as many bombers. But what happens is the 78th heads to the rendezvous point for the first bomb wing, which is going to Schweinfurt, and they're supposed to meet them over Antwerp. Well, Northwest Europe, the weather isn't always friendly, and they end up getting to the rendezvous point 8 minutes late. Well, at that point, there's a large concentration of twin-engine German fighters that are engaging the first bomb wing. And the 78th is able to engage and shoot down some of the twin-engine aircraft, but this is part of that. I mean, this air battle goes on for, it's like 3 or 4 hours long, right? If you've seen Masters of the Air, you're familiar with this battle. If you're familiar with 12 O'Clock High, or I Saw Regensburg Destroyed by Bernie Lay Jr., which is a fascinating article, and I think it was published in the New York Post, and I would recommend people go read that. But Bernie Lay was a B-17 pilot on that mission with the 100th Bomb Group, and he wrote about his whole experience. And anyways, so because they're late, there's bombers that are lost. This contributes to that devastating figure of 60 bombers go down with 600 men. And obviously that's tough for the 78th, because that was you can't control what you can't control, right? And because of that, those adverse weather conditions, they're 8 minutes late, and they lose some bombers because of that. So 3 of the top scoring 78th Fighter Group aces each have just crazy things that happened to them. So Quince Brown, who shoots down 12 German fighters during his time with the 78th, is shot down by AAA fire strafing a train over Schlieden, Germany. He bails out, and pilots are circling over him, and there's conflicting reports initially, and it's not until years later where they found out what happened to him. And it turned out that he was, my understanding is, he was basically put under citizen arrest, and then some SS soldiers took him away from the German civilians and then shot him in the back of the head. So he was effectively murdered by the SS shortly after being shot down by AAA fire. And there was some confliction on the reports of whether he was killed by civilians or by German soldiers, and it ended up being that he was shot by a pair of SS guys. So the second highest scoring ace is Alwyn Juckheim, who had 9 kills. And on May 28th, 1944, over Germany, Juckheim collides with the P-51 from the 363rd Fighter Group in this massive air battle. And just, situational awareness, rate of closure. It just, everything's happening so fast. His P-47 collides with this P-51 from the 9th Air Force. The P-51 pilot is killed, but Juckheim makes it out and is captured. James Wilkinson, he had 6 kills. So remember I mentioned that Brown made the first strafing attack by an 8th Air Force pilot during the war. Well, the 78th gets better and better at strafing locomotives. They really excel at taking out trains. And so the RAF asks the 78th for some demos on how to basically strafe trains, right? To show the 2nd Tactical Air Force, which is getting ready to support the Normandy invasion. They want to know what's the best way to take out trains. So the 78th sends James Wilkinson to South Wales, where this demo is supposed to take place. And this happens 2 days before D-Day. It's June 4th, 1944. And Wilkinson gets caught up in bad weather and crashes into the mountains of South Wales. And it's just, oh God. I mean, it's just so tragic that I mean, just, stuff like this didn't even happen to groups that had much higher scores than the 78th, had more aces. I mean, it's just so freaking tragic what happened to the 78th on some of these occasions. But again, that's just a couple of these incidents that made the 78th feel like a jinxed outfit until the end of the war, where I'll save this for another episode, another podcast episode. But things eventually turn around in terms of the morale department for the 78th later on in the war. But it's one of those things. Again, if you've read fighter pilot memoirs, there's always this superstition among the ranks of an air combat unit, and in particular the 78th. And just highlighting a few of these, you can certainly see why. So I hope this entices people. And I gotta say, it's going to be a lot of fun to dive into this project, and I certainly hope this will be beneficial for people who listen to the Air War podcast, and for people who have been subscribing to Pursuit Picks Media on YouTube, because we want both of these to benefit one another, and it'll be a nice way to sort of join wings with our podcast and our YouTube channel. So I think that's going to do it for me. I've been Mitchell Babarvich of the Air War Podcast, presented by Pursuit Picks Media. Hey, be sure to check us out on the socials, which, basically the main one's YouTube. Go subscribe to Pursuit Picks Media. And then the Air War Podcast, we're heavy on Instagram. So at Air War Podcast is our handle. So be sure to go check us out on there. If you're interested in any of the reference material that I used for this episode and my video that I talked about earlier about the 70th Fighter Group in Masters of the Air episode 9, it's going to be in the description of our YouTube video upload, and I'll have it all listed out. I'll put books on top and then websites on bottom. But anyways, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of the Air War Podcast, where we're talking about this introduction to the 78th Fighter Group project. So on that note, have a good one. We'll catch you next time.